This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 585, entitled What Life Will Be Like for Women Living in a World Where Feminism and Masculism are Equally Powerful. Description. In a decade or two, it's likely that feminist and masculist ideas will be equally powerful in society. So what will it be like to live in such a world for women? This flyer predicts how that will be and on how such a stage can be reached, which will not be pretty for women, since they will have to give up their current monopoly over gender politics, which they will not be readily willing to do, so will have to be forced to do so by the masculists. The millions of verbally bloody confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists will be both verbally violent and nasty. Now the flyer itself. What life will be like for women living in a world where feminism and masculism are equally powerful, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Jump a decade or two into the future that has seen the rise and rise of masculist thinking and its impact on society, on men, on women, on the gender laws, on daily life. What will life be like then, particularly on women? How will life have changed for them in a world where feminism and masculism are equally powerful? That is what this flyer is about. It attempts to anticipate the impact of masculist thinking on women a decade or so from now, extrapolating up the trends that are currently valid and trying to draw some reasonable conclusions. The current men's lib trend is that it is clear to men in the manosphere that the masculist and MGTOW message is really getting out to men, that men are waking up that marriage is a really shitty deal for men who get butchered in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system, losing custody of his kids with a 90% probability, losing his house, half his wealth and stuff, forced to pay for his kids he's barely allowed to see, and often forced to pay alimony to his fluffy ex-wife with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up, so she continues to parasite off him after the divorce as she did before the divorce. This, quote, marriage sucks for men message is really spreading widely amongst young men who are nearing marriageable age in many Western countries. For example, I read that in the UK, young men now care more about a potential girlfriend's level of fitness than her looks. That is, they are looking at these young women with a very cold, masculist eye, asking themselves, quote, is this woman a future man-slaving, divorce-raping, fluffy parasite? Question mark. Does she expect me to be her man-slave, working for her for decades of my life because she didn't bother to become career competent, that is, to fip up, by not bothering to study career competent majors at high school and college, so expects to live off my labour and money, thus making her a hated man-slaver, a fluffy parasitic vermin, whom the masculists preach to men are hated by men and are punished by being forced to rot on the shelf, by being totally ignored, not even pumped and dumped, so that their fluffy, man-slaving, divorce-raping genes are removed from the gene pool, forced into a slow, miserable death, because no man will go near them, having men, nearly all men, spit on them for being vermin, man-slaving, divorce-raping vermin, hated to the point of extinction. Over the next decade, millions of young men are really going to absorb this Masculist and MGTOW message and will put tremendous moral pressure on young women to fip up, to grow up, to stop using feminist dogma to blame men for women's problems, when women are largely responsible for causing their own problems. When monoconscious feminists lash out at men who have had their masculist consciousness raised, that is, who are biconscious, in brackets, that is, they're familiar with both feminist and masculist ideas, knowing that gender oppression is a two-way street, close brackets, then these biconscious masculists will become enraged at them, seeing them as monoconscious feminazi bigots, who are ignorant of the fact that women oppress men far worse, with women's decades-lasting major gender crimes against men. For example, women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc., which are horrific gender crimes against men that cause masculists to hate such women, such gender criminals. Masculists know that women commit worse gender crimes against men than vice versa, so have no patience nor tolerance for monoconscious feminists who know nothing of masculists' ideas. So when masculists come across such misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitches, these masculists bite the fucking heads off these women, abusing them powerfully with vitriolic masculist anger and hatred, yelling at them to, quote, "Learn some masculism, you monoconscious feminazi bigots." End quote. Over the next decade, millions of monoconscious women are going to suffer this very unpleasant experience as they are harangued and be socially and sexually rejected by quality masculisted men who won't tolerate MFBs, who will spit in their faces for being sexist, hypocritical bigots. That's shivers, SHB. ERS. After about a decade, so many women will have been taught masculist ideas that there will be lots of female masculists who have become familiar with the masculist viewpoint and who see that, in fact, women do oppress men worse with women's many gender crimes against men, and who agree with the masculists and most men that women do indeed have a very powerful moral obligation to get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up, or be justifiably accused by the masculists of being manslaving, divorce-raping vermin, and be punished severely by being forced to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. A few more years after that, this biconscious attitude on the part of women will become the norm, since so many women, in brackets, especially the smartest 10% of women who drag the rest of women behind them in terms of acceptance of the dominant ideas, close brackets, agree with it and live their lives according to it, that is, by accepting that women have to fip up, to pull their financial weight and grow up, expecting to take responsibility for their own lives and not expect to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man. A decade or so from now, masculist thinking will be as prevalent as feminist thinking, so women will be powerfully motivated not to express their evolved, inherent criteria for judging a man, that is, quote, "Can he pay for me to raise kids?" In a world where feminism and masculism are equally powerful, the gender laws will be men-fared, and the gender politicians will have worked out laws that are fair to both sexes. Women will be pushed to live according to MCTs, that's mother career timelines, so that they have the best of both worlds. That is, they have their 2 kids before they lose their fertility in their 30s, and they have a career for most of their lives, so that they do not parasite off the labour and money of a man. Both sexes will be pressured inevitably by governments to have their 2.1 children per couple, or we wipe ourselves out. That's just math. So tremendous moral pressure will come from governments and sages, that's intellectuals, to do this. Once there are equal numbers of masculists in the parliaments as feminists, and the GECs, that's GECs, in brackets, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, then society will be made gender fair to both sexes, both feminist and masculist. Everyone will be as aware of feminist ideas as of masculist ideas, so the world will be rid of the current monoconscious bigotry of the feminists who have been brainwashed over the past 6 decades of feminist gender political monopoly, that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, by men against women, whereas the masculists see women oppressing men worse with women's many decades-lasting gender crimes against men. It is this monoconscious hypocritical ignorance of the feminists that makes them so hated by the masculists, who over the next few years will be biting the fucking heads off these monoconscious feminazis, yelling at them with a vicious, aggressive, hateful, masculist tone, teaching them the errors of their ways, their feminazi bigotry, their monoconscious ignorance. After millions of such verbally violent, verbally bloody confrontations between monoconscious feminists and biconscious masculists, millions of feminists will become biconscious. And then we will begin to see the formation of a biconscious world in which the gender crimes of both sexes are addressed, both socially and politically. Gender laws will be made fair to both sexes, and over time everyone will become biconscious. Women will lose their monoconscious feminazi bitchery and will learn to think biconsciously, knowing that if a woman is stupid enough to express monoconscious feminazi thinking publicly, she will have her fucking head bitten off by very angry, hateful masculists who will not tolerate her bigoted hypocrisy and will punish her brutally. Such women will then find themselves rotting on the shelf, dying a slow, miserable death, manless and alone, miserable and on anti-depression drugs, as are already a third of middle-aged women today. A decade or so from today, most women will see biconsciousness as the norm. It will seem so natural that it will not even be questioned. And then the masculists can quietly fade away since they will no longer be needed. The world will have been men-faired for them. So they will have the wind removed from their sails so they can move on to other things. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 580 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.